In the unforgiving badlands of Arizona Territory, 1885, where mercy was as scarce as water and second chances rarer than gold strikes, some stories began with the sound of a baby's cry cutting through the desert wind like a knife through silence. This is one of those stories about a man running from his past, an infant who held his broken heart together, and a woman whose compassion would transform them all. Jace Sullivan had been many things in his 32 years: soldier, gunfighter, and fool. But as he rode into Desert Ridge with Samuel clutched against his chest, the baby's desperate wails echoing across the barren landscape, he was simply a man drowning in responsibility he'd never asked for. His wife's dying words haunted every mile. "Promise me you'll keep him safe." Now, 3 days without proper milk and watching the child grow weaker, Jace faced the terrifying possibility that love might not be enough. Desert Ridge squatted in the valley like a collection of broken bones bleached white by the sun. Here, among the desperate and the damned, where water cost more than whiskey and trust was a luxury few could afford, the last thing anyone expected was redemption. But sometimes salvation came wearing the most unlikely faces, and sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could change the course of a man's entire life. The baby's cries had become Jace Sullivan's heartbeat, constant, desperate, cutting through his soul with every ragged breath. 3 days of riding through Arizona's merciless desert had left both man and child hollow-eyed and trembling. Jace's buckskin gelding, Thunder, picked his way carefully down the rocky slope toward Desert Ridge, nostrils flaring at the scent of water somewhere in the maze of adobe buildings below. Desert Ridge looked like God had forgotten it halfway through creation. Buildings leaned against each other for support, their walls cracked and weathered by sandstorms and neglect. The main street was little more than hardpan earth mixed with horse droppings and broken dreams. But it was civilization, and civilization meant milk, and milk meant Samuel might live to see another sunrise. Jace dismounted in front of the general store, his legs unsteady after hours in the saddle. Samuel stirred against his chest, letting out a weak cry that barely qualified as sound. The baby's lips were dry, his tiny face flushed with fever. Jace had tried everything: sugar water, drops of whiskey, even his own saliva. But nothing could replace what Samuel truly needed. The store owner, a heavy-set man with suspicious eyes and tobacco-stained teeth, looked up from his ledger as Jace entered. "We don't serve your kind here," he said without preamble. "My kind?" Jace's voice was rough from dust and exhaustion. "Drifters, gunfighters, men who bring trouble." The man's gaze fixed on the Colt strapped to Jace's hip. That iron's seen use, and recent by the look of it. Jace ignored the accusation. "I need milk. Powdered, canned, anything. The baby's starving." "Ain't got none." The lie came easy, practiced. "Try the saloon. Maybe one of the girls can help." The Broken Wheel Saloon reeked of stale beer, unwashed bodies, and desperation. Piano music stumbled through off-key melodies while painted women with dead eyes served drinks to men who'd given up on tomorrow. Conversations died as Jace entered, Samuel's weak cries drawing stares and whispers. "Well, I'll be damned," called a voice from the bar. "That's some interesting cargo you got there, stranger." Jace approached the bartender, a scarred man with arms like tree trunks. "I need milk for the baby. I can pay." The bartender laughed, a sound like gravel in a bucket. "This looked like a nursery to you. We serve whiskey, not wet nurses." "Please." The word tasted like ashes in Jace's mouth. "He hasn't eaten in 2 days." "That's a real shame," the bartender said, not sounding sympathetic at all. "But crying babies are bad for business. Take it outside before my customers get irritated." Jace laid $2 silver on the bar, the last of his money. "Anything. Goat milk, cow milk, anything at all." A woman at the end of the bar, her rouge unable to hide the hardness in her face, spoke up. "Might try the doc's daughter. Lives in the adobe house past the church. She's got away with difficult cases." The bartender shot her a warning look. "Mind your own business, Maggie." "Doc's dead 3 years now," she continued, ignoring him. "But his girl, Abigail, she's got healing hands. Helps folks when they got nowhere else to turn." Jace pocketed his coins and headed for the door. Behind him, conversations resumed in hushed tones. He caught fragments. Ah, looks like trouble. That baby ain't gonna make it. Seen his type before? The church was little more than four walls and a cross, paint peeling like dead skin. Beyond it sat a small adobe house with a garden that somehow stayed green despite the desert heat. Smoke curled from the chimney, and somewhere inside, Jace could hear the soft sound of humming, a lullaby his own mother had sung decades ago. He dismounted and approached the door on unsteady legs. Samuel had gone quiet, but it was the wrong kind of quiet, the kind that came before the end. Jace raised his fist to knock, then hesitated. What if she turned him away too? What if this was just another dead end in a territory full of them? The door opened before he could knock. Abigail Foster stood in the doorway like something out of a fever dream. She couldn't have been more than 25, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun and green eyes that seemed to see everything. Her dress was simple but clean, and her hands, small, capable hands, were already reaching for Samuel before she'd even looked at Jace. "How long since he's eaten?" she asked, her voice soft but urgent. 3 days, Jace admitted. Maybe longer. His mother died in childbirth back in Tucson. I've been trying to get him somewhere safe, but... "Bring him inside," Abigail said, stepping back. Quickly. The interior of the house was a sanctuary. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, filling the air with scents of lavender and sage. Books lined the walls, medical texts, journals, things Jace hadn't seen since his brief time in a real city. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light over everything. Abigail had already settled into a rocking chair near the fire, her blouse loosened with practiced efficiency. "Hand him to me," she said simply. Jace hesitated. He'd held Samuel close for so many miles that letting go felt like tearing away part of himself. But the baby was dying, and this woman, this stranger, was his only hope. The moment Abigail cradled Samuel against her breast, the change was immediate. The baby latched instinctively, desperately, his tiny fist kneading against her skin. The sound that followed, soft suckling, then a contented sigh, hit Jace like a physical blow. He turned away, his throat tight with emotions he couldn't name. "What's his name?" Abigail asked softly. "Samuel. His mother named him before." Jace's voice broke slightly. "Before she died." "And yours? Jace Sullivan." Abigail nodded, her attention focused on the child in her arms. "I lost one too," she said quietly. "Fever took him when he was 6 months old. That was 2 years ago." Jace turned back to look at her. There was no self-pity in her voice, just the kind of acceptance that came from surviving unthinkable loss. "I'm sorry. Folks don't like to talk about it," she continued. "Say it's God's will. Say I should move on. But some things change you forever." She looked down at Samuel, who had fallen asleep at her breast. "Some losses hollow you out until you're nothing but echo and emptiness. Then why help us?" Abigail smiled, and it was the first genuine warmth Jace had seen since leaving Tucson. "Because maybe filling that emptiness with love for someone else's child is better than staying hollow forever." They sat in comfortable silence as night fell over Desert Ridge. Samuel slept peacefully for the first time in days, his breathing steady and strong. Jace found himself watching Abigail more than the baby. The gentle way she rocked, the reverence in her touch, the maternal instincts that transcended blood and biology. "You can stay in the stable tonight," she said eventually. "There's clean straw and blankets. Samuel needs to eat again in a few hours." Jace nodded but made no move to leave. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me, don't know what I've done." Abigail met his eyes steadily. "I know you've ridden 3 days through desert heat to save this baby's life. I know you spent your last money trying to feed him. I know you're scared and desperate and doing the best you can." She paused. "That's enough for me." Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, answered by another, then another. Desert Ridge settled into uneasy sleep around them. But inside Abigail Foster's small house, 3 lost souls had found each other in the darkness, and for the first time in longer than any of them could remember, the future didn't look quite so bleak. As Jace finally made his way to the stable, Samuel's peaceful breathing filling the silence, He dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd found sanctuary in this forgotten corner of the territory. What he didn't know was that sanctuary, like everything else worth having, would have to be fought for, and that Desert Ridge held dangers far worse than dying of thirst in the desert. Dawn came slowly to Desert Ridge, painting the adobe buildings in shades of rose and gold that almost made the town look beautiful. Jace woke to the sound of Samuel crying, not the desperate wails of starvation, but the healthy demands of a baby who expected his needs to be met. The sound was the most beautiful thing he'd heard in days. He found Abigail in her kitchen, already preparing a simple breakfast of eggs and cornbread, while Samuel nursed contentedly in a makeshift cradle near the stove. She looked up as Jace entered, noting the way he moved, careful, alert, like a man who'd learned that safety was always temporary. "Coffee's on the stove," she said, nodding toward a blackened pot. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in weeks." Jace poured himself a cup, savoring the bitter warmth. "How's Samuel?" "Strong, determined. He ate twice during the night and didn't even wake you." Abigail smiled down at the baby. "He's going to be fine, Jace. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for." Jace felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. For 3 days he'd lived with the constant fear that Samuel might die in his arms, that he'd failed to keep the promise he'd made to Clara on her deathbed. Now, watching the baby sleep peacefully after a full belly, he dared to believe they might both survive this. After breakfast, Abigail showed him around her small homestead. Behind the house was a well that never ran dry, a vegetable garden that thrived despite the harsh climate, and a small stable where Thunder could rest and recover from their desert crossing. Everything spoke of careful planning and hard work, of a woman who'd built a life from nothing but determination and skill. "My father was the territorial doctor," she explained as they walked through the garden. "He taught me everything he knew before the consumption took him. Now I help people when I can. Birthing babies, setting bones, treating fevers. Desert Ridge doesn't have much, but it has enough people who need healing." "And they pay you for it?" Abigail shrugged. "Sometimes with money, more often with goods or services. Mrs. Patterson brings eggs. Tom Bradley fixed my roof last winter. It's not much, but it's enough." As they talked, Jace found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in months. Abigail had an easy manner that invited confidence, a way of listening that made him want to tell her things he'd never shared with anyone. But he held back, knowing that his past was a burden too heavy for her shoulders. That afternoon, while Abigail tended to Samuel, Jace rode into town for supplies. He needed ammunition, food, and information about the trail ahead. But mostly he needed to get a sense of Desert Ridge's residents and whether they'd be trouble. The general store owner was more accommodating with Jace's money in hand, though his suspicion never fully faded. "You planning on staying long?" he asked as he wrapped salt pork and hardtack. "Just passing through," Jace replied. "Soon as the baby's strong enough for travel." "Might want to move that along," the man said quietly. Words spreading about a stranger with a baby. Some folks are curious about why a man would be traveling alone with an infant. Jace paid for his supplies without comment, but the warning stuck with him. In the saloon, conversation stopped when he entered, resuming in whispers when he passed. Eyes followed his movements, noting the way he wore his gun, the scars on his hands, the wariness that never left his posture. The bartender from the night before nodded as he approached. "Heard you found what you were looking for." "The baby's doing better, thanks." "That's good. Real good." The bartender leaned closer, lowering his voice. "But you might want to know, there's been a rider asking questions. Came through yesterday, showed a wanted poster with your face on it." Jace's blood turned to ice. What kind of questions? The kind that come with a $500 bounty attached. Said you killed a family outside Phoenix, burned their house with them inside. "That's a lie." The words came out harsher than Jace intended. "Maybe so, maybe not. But the law's the law, and $500 is more money than most folks in this town see in a year." The bartender straightened up. Ryder said he'd be back with the federal marshal. Might want to consider moving on before that happens. Jace left the saloon with his mind racing. He'd known this day would come, had been running from it for months. The Phoenix incident had been a setup, a trap laid by Cain Blackwood to destroy what was left of Jace's reputation. But proving that would require time he didn't have and resources he didn't possess. He rode back to Abigail's house with his thoughts spinning like a dust devil. Samuel was healthy enough for travel now, and staying would only put Abigail in danger. But the thought of leaving, of taking Samuel back into the uncertain hell of the trail, made his stomach clench with dread. Abigail was waiting for him on the porch, Samuel sleeping in her arms. One look at Jace's face told her everything she needed to know. "Trouble?" she asked quietly. "A bounty hunter's looking for me. Claims I'm wanted for murder." Jace dismounted slowly, his movements heavy with resignation. "We need to leave. Tonight before—" "No!" Abigail's voice was firm, brooking no argument. "You don't understand. They think I killed a family, burned down their house. If they find me here, you'll be considered an accomplice. Are you guilty?" Jace met her eyes. "Number. But that doesn't matter. The law sees what it wants to see, and $500 buys a lot of willful blindness." Abigail stood up, cradling Samuel protectively. "Then we'll face it together." "Abigail, you can't—" "This is my home, Jace. My father built this house with his own hands, and I won't be driven from it by lies and bounty money." She stepped closer, her green eyes fierce with determination. "Besides, Samuel needs stability. He needs a place where he can grow strong and safe. Running will only make you look guilty." That night, as they sat by the fire discussing their options, Abigail told Jace about her own past. Her father had been a Union Army surgeon who'd come west after the war, seeking peace and purpose in healing rather than killing. He'd taught her that sometimes standing your ground was the only way to preserve what mattered most. "He used to say that running from the truth never solved anything," she said, rocking Samuel gently. "It just gave your enemies more time to manufacture evidence against you." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was, and he was also stubborn as a mule when he believed he was right." Abigail smiled. "I get that from him." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending sand skittering across the roof. Somewhere in the darkness, a horse nickered nervously, and Jace's hand moved instinctively toward his gun. He'd spent too many nights listening for hoofbeats that might belong to men coming to kill him. "Get some rest," Abigail said, noticing his tension. "Whatever comes tomorrow, we'll face it with clear heads and steady hands." But sleep didn't come easily for Jace Sullivan. He lay in the stable loft, listening to the night sounds of the desert, thinking about the woman who'd shown him more kindness in 2 days than he'd received in 2 years of running. Samuel was safe now, healthy and protected. That was what mattered. That was what Clara had made him promise. If staying meant facing Cain Blackwood's lies in a courtroom, so be it. If it meant drawing iron against bounty hunters, he'd do that too. But he wouldn't run anymore. Not when he'd finally found something worth fighting for. In the house, Abigail Foster sat by the dying fire, holding a baby who wasn't hers by blood, but was becoming hers by choice. She thought about the scarred, dangerous man sleeping in her stable, about the way he looked at Samuel with such desperate love, about the gentleness in his hands when he held the child. Tomorrow would bring trouble. She could feel it in the desert wind. But tonight, for the first time since her own baby had died, Abigail felt like she had a family worth protecting, and she'd learned from her father that some things were worth any price to defend. Outside, stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human struggles, but somehow blessing this small corner of the territory where mercy had found a foothold and love was taking root in the most unlikely soil. The trouble arrived 3 days later in the form of Deputy Marshal Frank Devlin, a lean man with cold eyes and a badge that gleamed like fresh silver. He rode into Desert Ridge with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his own righteousness, accompanied by a local bounty hunter named Pete Grimm, whose reputation was as ugly as his scarred face. Jace watched them from Abigail's kitchen window, his coffee growing cold in his hands. Samuel played on a blanket near the stove, babbling contentedly while reaching for wooden blocks Abigail had carved for him. The domestic scene felt surreal against the backdrop of approaching danger. "That's them," Jace said quietly. Abigail moved to stand beside him, her shoulder brushing his arm. "The marshal looks honest enough." Honest men can still be wrong, and bounty hunters like Grimm don't care about truth, only profit. They watched as the two men dismounted in front of the sheriff's office. Even from a distance, it was clear they were asking questions, showing papers, building a case. Within an hour, every resident of Desert Ridge would know why they were there. "I should go to them," Chase said. "Turn myself in before they come looking." "Absolutely not." Abigail's tone brooked no argument. "We agreed to face this together, and that's what we're going to do. Abigail, if they find me here, they'll find a man caring for his child in the home of a respected member of this community. Sometimes appearances matter more than accusations." Jace looked down at her, struck once again by her quiet strength. In the 3 days since the marshal's approach had been announced, Abigail had transformed from a woman offering temporary shelter into something he'd never expected to find again, a partner. She'd stood with him through Samuel's feverish night, helped him practice his testimony, even cleaned and oiled his weapons while discussing legal strategy. "You don't have to do this," he said. "Samuel and I could disappear tonight, head for Mexico, and spend the rest of your lives looking over your shoulders. That's no way to raise a child." Abigail picked up Samuel, who gurgled happily at the attention. "Besides, I've grown rather fond of you both. I'm not ready to say goodbye." The admission hung between them like morning mist, delicate and precious. Over the past week, something had grown between Jace and Abigail that went beyond gratitude or convenience. It was in the way she handed him coffee in the morning, how he unconsciously moved to stand between her and potential danger. The comfortable silences they shared while watching Samuel sleep. A knock at the door interrupted their moment. Jace's hand moved to his gun, but Abigail touched his wrist gently. "Let me," she said. Deputy Marshal Devlin stood on the porch with his hat in his hands, looking more like a man paying a social call than a lawman making an arrest. Behind him, Pete Grimm lounged against the porch rail, his hand resting casually on his gun butt. "Miss Foster," Devlin said politely, "I'm Deputy Marshal Frank Devlin. I was hoping I could have a word." "Of course, Marshal. Please come in." Devlin entered, but Grimm remained outside, a strategic positioning that wasn't lost on Jace. The Marshal's eyes swept the room, taking in the domestic details. Baby clothes hanging by the fire, toys scattered on the floor, the unmistakable signs of a family home. "I understand you've been providing assistance to a man named Jace Sullivan," Devlin said carefully. "Mr. Sullivan and his son have been staying here, yes. The baby was quite ill when they arrived." "His son?" Devlin's eyebrows rose slightly. "Little Samuel." Abigail adjusted the baby in her arms with natural maternal grace. "He's recovered wonderfully, haven't you, sweetheart?" Jace stepped forward, hands visible and non-threatening. "Marshal, I'm Jace Sullivan. I believe you're looking for me." Devlin studied him carefully. The man standing before him bore little resemblance to the wild-eyed desperado described in the wanted posters. Jace was clean-shaven, his clothes neat, his manner respectful. Most telling of all was the way he looked at the baby, with the fierce protective love of a devoted father. "Mr. Sullivan, I have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the deaths of the Morrison family outside Phoenix. You're accused of arson and multiple counts of murder." "I didn't do it," Jace said simply. "I was there, but I tried to save them, not kill them. That's for a court to decide. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to come with me." "No." Abigail's voice was steady but firm. "Samuel needs his father. Surely you can see that Mr. Sullivan poses no flight risk. He's been here for a week, could have run at any time." Devlin hesitated. The scene before him didn't match his expectations. He'd been told to expect a dangerous criminal, possibly holding hostages. Instead, he found what appeared to be a small family, living quietly in a respectable home. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but—" "Marshal," Abigail interrupted, "before you make any decisions, there are some things you should know about the Morrison case." She walked to her father's desk and retrieved a bundle of letters. "I've been corresponding with a colleague in Phoenix, Dr. Margaret Winters. She treated some of the survivors and has information that might be relevant to your investigation." Devlin accepted the letters with obvious skepticism, but as he read, his expression grew troubled. Dr. Winters' account painted a very different picture than the official report. According to her testimony, Jace Sullivan had pulled 2 Morrison children from the burning house, sustaining burns to his own hands in the process. He'd been trying to save the family, not destroy it. This is all very interesting, Devlin said finally, but it doesn't change the fact that there's a warrant. Marshal, the voice came from the doorway, where Sheriff Tom Bradley stood with his hat in his hands. Might I have a word? Bradley was a local man, elected more for his fairness than his gun skills. He'd known Abigail since she was a child and respected her judgment implicitly. Sheriff, this is federal business. I understand that, Marshal, but Miss Foster here has been treating folks in this territory for years. Saved my own wife during a difficult birth last spring. If she says a man's innocent, that carries weight with me. It's not about innocence or guilt, Devlin said, though his conviction was wavering. It's about following proper procedure. Then follow it, Abigail said, but do it here. Mr. Sullivan isn't going anywhere, and Samuel needs stability. Surely you can conduct your investigation without separating a father from his infant son. The room fell silent except for Samuel's soft babbling and the tick of the mantel clock. Outside, Pete Grimm shifted impatiently, his spurs jangling against the porch boards. "Where's the fire in this?" Grimm called through the open door. "We got our man. Let's take him in and collect our money." Devlin shot him a sharp look. "You'll speak when spoken to, Grimm." The bounty hunter's face darkened, but he said nothing more. Jace noticed the exchange and filed it away. Tension between a federal marshal and his hired help might be useful information. "I'll need to send some telegrams," Devlin said finally. "Verify some of these details with Phoenix. Sheriff, can Mr. Sullivan be housed in your jail temporarily?" "Don't have a jail," Bradley replied. "Just a couple of cells in the back of my office, and they ain't fit for a man with a baby." "He can stay here," Abigail said, "under house arrest if necessary. I'll vouch for his character." Devlin looked around the room once more, taking in the evidence of genuine domesticity. Whatever Jace Sullivan might have done in his past, he clearly wasn't the same man now. The change in him was palpable, the way he held himself, the gentleness in his voice when he spoke to the baby, the obvious care he took not to alarm anyone. "Very well," the marshal said. "Mr. Sullivan, you're confined to this property pending further investigation. Any attempt to leave will result in immediate arrest. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir." "And Miss Foster, you're vouching for this man's character. I hope you understand the responsibility that entails." Abigail lifted her chin proudly. "I do, Marshal, completely." After Devlin left, Jace sank into a chair by the fire, overwhelmed by the weight of what had just happened. Abigail had risked her reputation, possibly her freedom, to stand with him. She'd faced down a federal marshal with nothing but conviction and courage. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Why would you do that for me?" Abigail sat beside him, still holding Samuel. "Because I believe in you, because this baby needs his father, and because—" She paused, color rising in her cheeks. "Because I've come to care about what happens to both of you." The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Jace reached out to touch her hand, marveling at the softness of her skin, the strength in her fingers. "Abigail, don't say anything you might regret," she said softly. "Just promise me you'll fight. Promise me you won't give up on yourself or on Samuel or on the possibility that good things can still happen to good people." Jace looked into her green eyes and saw something he'd thought was lost forever. Hope. Not the desperate hope of a drowning man, but the steady, enduring hope of someone who believed the future could be better than the past. "I promise," he said. Outside, the sun set over Desert Ridge in a blaze of orange and purple, painting the adobe buildings in warm light. In Abigail Foster's small house, three people who'd found each other against all odds settled in for another night, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but facing them together. For the first time since Clara's death, Jace Sullivan dared to believe that he might not have to face the future alone. The telegram from Dr. Winters arrived 5 days later, delivered by a nervous boy who'd ridden hard from the territorial capital. Marshal Devlin read it twice before walking to Abigail's house, his expression unreadable, but his step lighter than it had been in days. Jace was in the garden with Samuel, showing the baby how tomatoes grew, while Abigail harvested herbs for her medical practice. The domestic scene struck Devlin powerfully. This was not a dangerous criminal hiding from justice, but a man building a life with quiet determination. "Mr. Sullivan," Devlin called, "I need to speak with you." They gathered in Abigail's sitting room, Samuel playing contentedly on his blanket while the adults discussed his father's fate. Devlin spread several documents on the table, including the telegram, witness statements, and revised crime scene reports. "Dr. Winters has been very thorough," the marshal began. "She's interviewed 3 additional witnesses who place you at the scene trying to rescue the Morrison family, not harm them. She's also uncovered some interesting information about who might have actually started that fire." Jace leaned forward, hardly daring to hope. "What kind of information?" "It seems a man named Kane Blackwood was seen in the area that night. He had a grudge against John Morrison over a land dispute, and several witnesses now remember seeing him leaving the scene just before the fire started." Abigail reached for Jace's hand, squeezing gently. "Kane Blackwood," she said. "I've heard that name before. Hasn't he been trouble for years?" "More than trouble," Devlin replied grimly. "He's wanted in 3 territories for various crimes, but he's been clever about staying ahead of the law. This might be the evidence we need to finally bring him in." "So I'm cleared?" Jace asked, afraid to believe it. "The charges against you are being dropped. Dr. Winter's investigation shows clear evidence that you were trying to save lives, not take them. There will be a formal hearing in Phoenix to make it official, but for all practical purposes, you're a free man." The relief that washed over Jace was so intense it left him lightheaded. For months he'd been running, looking over his shoulder, wondering if every sunset might be his last as a free man. Now suddenly, the future stretched ahead with possibilities he'd hardly dared imagine. "There's more," Devlin continued. "The territorial governor is offering a reward for information leading to Kane Blackwood's capture. Your testimony about his involvement in the Morrison case could be quite valuable." "I'll testify," Jace said without hesitation, "whatever it takes to see him brought to justice." But their celebration was cut short by the sound of approaching horses. Through the window they could see Pete Grimm riding toward the house with 3 other men, all armed and looking determined. "That's not good," Devlin muttered, reaching for his gun. "Grimm's not going to be happy about losing his bounty money." Jace was already moving, scooping Samuel into his arms while motioning for Abigail to get behind the heavy wooden table. "How many bullets in that rifle of yours?" he asked. "Enough," she replied grimly, checking the load with practiced efficiency. Grimm's voice boomed across the yard. "Sullivan, come on out. Federal marshal says you're innocent, but I got a different opinion." Devlin stepped onto the porch, badge prominently displayed. "Grimm, you're out of line here. The charges have been dropped." "Maybe so, but I got expenses to recoup, and I don't much like being made a fool of." Grimm spat into the dust. "Sullivan comes out now, or we come in and get him." "You'll do no such thing," Devlin replied, his hand resting on his weapon. "You've got no authority here, and I'm ordering you to stand down." Grimm's laugh was ugly. "You're one man, Marshal. I count 4 of us. Arithmetic ain't complicated." Inside the house, Jace was weighing their options. The walls were thick adobe that would stop most bullets, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Worse, Samuel's presence limited their ability to fight back effectively. "There's a root cellar under the kitchen," Abigail whispered. "It's well hidden in solid stone. Samuel would be safe there." Jace nodded, carrying the baby to the concealed entrance. Samuel seemed to sense the tension, his dark eyes wide and solemn as his father settled him into the underground space with blankets and toys. "Stay quiet, little man," Jace murmured, pressing a kiss to the baby's forehead. "Papa will be right back." When he returned to the main room, Abigail had positioned herself at a window with her rifle while Devlin covered the front door. The marshal's face was grim, but determined. "I've sent for Sheriff Bradley," Devlin said, "but it'll be 20 minutes before he gets here with help." 20 minutes is a lifetime in a gunfight," Jace replied, checking his Colt. "How do you want to play this?" Before Devlin could answer, the shooting started. Windows exploded inward as Grimm's men opened fire, filling the room with flying glass and splinters. Abigail's rifle cracked in response, and one of the attackers cried out in pain. "Got one!" she called, already working the bolt for another shot. Jace moved to the side window, returning fire with methodical precision. His shots were carefully placed, designed to pin down the attackers rather than kill them outright. But Grimm's men had no such restraint. They were shooting to kill. "This is insane. Devlin shouted over the gunfire. "They're trying to murder a federal marshal." "Grimm's past caring about consequences," Jace replied, ducking as another volley shattered the window frame above his head. "He's gone loco with greed and wounded pride." The siege continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Grimm's men had taken cover behind the water trough and garden fence, making it difficult to get clean shots. Meanwhile, their ammunition was slowly dwindling. Then Abigail gasped, pointing toward the back of the house. "Fire! They're trying to burn us out!" Smoke was beginning to seep through the floorboards, and the smell of burning wood filled the air. Grimm had decided to end the standoff by forcing them into the open. "We have to get Samuel," Jace said, starting toward the cellar. "No!" Abigail grabbed his arm. "He's safer down there. The cellar has its own air supply and stone walls. The fire can't reach him." Jace's face was anguished. Every instinct screamed at him to protect Samuel, but Abigail was right. The cellar was the safest place for the baby. "Then we make our stand here," he said grimly, "and we make sure Samuel has a father to come back to." The fire was spreading faster now, licking at the walls and filling the house with choking smoke. Through the haze, they could see Grimm's men positioning themselves for a final assault. "On my signal," Devlin said, coughing from the smoke, "we go out the front door shooting. It's our only chance." But before they could move, the thunder of hoofbeats filled the air. Sheriff Bradley arrived with 6 deputies, surrounding Grimm's position and calling for surrender. "Drop your weapons!" Bradley shouted. "You're surrounded!" Grimm's response was a shot that barely missed the sheriff's head. The battle was joined in earnest now, with Bradley's men exchanging fire with the bounty hunters, while Jace, Abigail, and Devlin fought the fire spreading through the house. In the end, it was over quickly. Outgunned and surrounded, Grimm's men either surrendered or fled. Grimm himself took a bullet in the shoulder from one of Bradley's deputies and collapsed, cursing into the dust. Jace raced to the cellar, his heart pounding until he heard Samuel's healthy cries. The baby was frightened but unharmed, reaching out with tiny arms when he saw his father's face. "It's over, little man," Jace whispered, holding Samuel close. "We're safe now." The fire had damaged much of the house, but the stone walls had held. More importantly, no one had been seriously hurt. As the smoke cleared and the last of Grimm's men were led away in shackles, a strange peace settled over the scene. "Well," Devlin said, surveying the damage, "I'd say that settles any question about your character, Mr. Sullivan. A guilty man wouldn't have stayed to fight for his family." Jace looked at Abigail, who was covered in soot but smiling with relief. "My family," he repeated softly. "Yes, I suppose that's what we've become." The rebuilding of Abigail's house became a community effort that surprised everyone, including the residents of Desert Ridge themselves. Word of the siege had spread quickly, along with the truth about Jace's innocence and the courage he'd shown in defending the town's beloved healer. Men who'd regarded him with suspicion just days before now arrived with lumber and tools, determined to help restore what the fire had destroyed. Jace worked alongside them, his sleeves rolled up and his hands busy with hammer and nails. The physical labor felt good after weeks of tension and uncertainty. Samuel watched from a blanket in the shade, babbling contentedly while various townswomen took turns entertaining him. "Never seen anything like it," Sheriff Bradley commented, pausing to wipe sweat from his forehead. "Whole towns turned out to help. Even some folks who weren't too friendly before." Abigail emerged from the ruins of her kitchen, her hair tied back with a kerchief and her dress protected by a leather apron. Despite the destruction, she seemed more energetic than Jace had ever seen her. "The medical supplies are mostly intact," she reported, "and the well wasn't damaged. We can have the basic structure rebuilt within a week." "We?" Jace asked, setting down his hammer. Abigail blushed slightly. "I mean, well, I assumed you'd be staying, at least until Samuel is older." The truth was, Jace had been thinking about little else. The events of the past few days had crystallized something he'd been trying to avoid acknowledging. He was in love with Abigail Foster, not just grateful for her help, not just attracted to her strength and kindness, but genuinely, deeply in love. "Abigail," he said quietly, "we need to talk." They walked away from the construction noise, finding privacy in the shade of the cottonwood tree where Abigail's father was buried. Samuel gurgled happily in Jace's arms, reaching for the dancing shadows cast by the leaves. I've been thinking about what comes next, Jace began. The charges against me are dropped, but that doesn't erase my past. I've done things, been places, seen things that might always make me a target. Is that fair to you? To Samuel? Abigail was quiet for a long moment, her green eyes studying his face. My father used to say that every man deserves a chance to start over, to become better than he was. He believed in redemption, in the possibility that people could change. And what do you believe? I believe in you, she said simply. I believe in the man I've seen these past weeks. Gentle with Samuel, protective of those he cares about, willing to sacrifice himself for others. That's not the same person who rode with Kane Blackwood's gang. Jace's breath caught. How did you know about that? Marshal Devlin told me. He said you rode with Blackwood for 6 months after the war, before Clara helped you see what you were becoming. Abigail stepped closer. He also said you saved 3 innocent people from Blackwood's violence before you finally broke away completely. I was lost, Jace admitted. After the war, after seeing what men could do to each other, I didn't know how to be anything but angry. Clara saw something in me I couldn't see myself. And now, Jace looked down at Samuel, then back at Abigail. Now I see what she saw. I see a man who could be a good father, a good husband, a good member of a community, but only if... If what? If you'll have me, both of us, as a family. Abigail's smile was radiant. Jace Sullivan, are you proposing to me? I suppose I am, though I should probably do it properly. He shifted Samuel to one arm and dropped to one knee. Abigail Foster, will you marry me? Will you be Samuel's mother and my wife? Will you help me become the man I want to be? Yes, she said, tears streaming down her face. Yes to all of it. The construction crew noticed the commotion and began cheering, their hammers and saws forgotten in favor of celebration. Someone produced a bottle of whiskey, and impromptu toasts were raised to the couple's happiness. As the sun set over Desert Ridge, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Jace and Abigail stood together watching their new home take shape. Samuel slept peacefully in Abigail's arms, and for the first time since Clara's death, Jace felt truly at peace. There's something else, Abigail said softly. Something I haven't told you. Jace tensed slightly. What is it? I'm with child. It's early yet, but I'm certain. She looked up at him, suddenly uncertain. I know it complicates things. Jace silenced her with a kiss, gentle but passionate. When they broke apart, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. It doesn't complicate anything, he said. It makes everything perfect. 3 months later, they were married in the newly rebuilt house, surrounded by friends and neighbors who'd come to regard them as family. Samuel, now walking and chattering constantly, served as an enthusiastic, if unofficial, ring-bearer. Abigail wore her mother's dress, altered to accommodate her growing belly, and Jace wore a new suit ordered specially from Phoenix. Marshal Devlin performed the ceremony, having stayed in Desert Ridge to oversee the manhunt for Kane Blackwood. The outlaw was still at large, but his gang had been scattered and his influence broken. More importantly, the reward money for his capture had allowed Jace and Abigail to expand their homestead and establish a proper medical practice. As they exchanged vows beneath the cottonwood tree, the same tree where Abigail's father was buried, Jace felt the presence of those who'd helped shape their path. Clara, who'd shown him the possibility of redemption. Dr. Foster, who'd raised a daughter strong enough to heal broken souls. Even the unknown circumstances that had brought them together seemed touched by Providence. I promise, Jace said, his voice carrying clearly in the desert air, to love you, protect you, and honor you for all the days of my life. I promise to be the father Samuel deserves and the husband you've chosen. I promise to help you heal others and to build a life worthy of the second chance you've given me. I promise, Abigail replied, her voice strong despite her tears, to stand beside you through whatever comes, to love Samuel as my own, and to never let you forget that you're worthy of love and happiness. I promise to be your partner in all things, in healing and in building a future our children can be proud of. When they kissed, sealing their union, the cheer that went up from the assembled crowd could be heard for miles across the desert. It was a sound of pure joy, of community celebration, of hope triumphant over despair. That night, as they lay in their rebuilt home, with Samuel sleeping peacefully in his crib nearby, Jace marveled at the journey that had brought them here. He'd ridden into Desert Ridge, a desperate fugitive carrying a dying baby, convinced that his life was over. Now he was a husband and father, a respected member of the community, a man with a future bright with possibility. "What are you thinking about?" Abigail asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "How far we've come. How different everything is from what I expected." "Any regrets?" Jace tightened his arms around her, feeling the gentle swell of her belly where their child grew. "None. Not a single one." Outside, the desert wind sang through the cottonwood leaves, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of rain. In the rebuilt house, three people who'd found each other against all odds settled into sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but facing them together. The man who'd been running from his past had finally found his future. The woman who'd lost everything had discovered that love could grow from the ashes of grief. And the baby who'd nearly died in the desert would grow up knowing that family wasn't just about blood, but about the daily choice to love, protect, and cherish each other through whatever storms might come. 6 months after the wedding, Desert Ridge had transformed into something resembling a real town. The arrival of the railroad survey team had brought new businesses, new residents, and new hope to the community. But for Jace and Abigail Sullivan, the changes were more personal and profound. Their daughter, Clara Rose, had been born 3 weeks earlier, a healthy, vocal baby who'd inherited her mother's green eyes and her father's determined chin. Samuel, now 2 years old and walking confidently, had appointed himself her protector, hovering near her cradle and chattering to her in a mixture of English and the baby talk that seemed to cross all language barriers. Jace stood in the doorway of the nursery, watching his wife nurse their daughter while Samuel played quietly nearby. The scene filled him with a contentment so deep it sometimes left him breathless. This was what Clara had wanted for him when she'd made him promise to keep Samuel safe. Not just survival, but happiness, family, a life worth living. "She's going to be as stubborn as her mother," Abigail said softly, looking up from Clara Rose's nursing. "God help us all," Jace replied with a grin. "One strong-willed woman in this house is challenge enough." Abigail laughed, the sound filling the room with warmth. "You wouldn't have it any other way, and you know it." The truth was, Jace had never imagined he could be this happy. His medical practice, he'd finally accepted the town's insistence on calling him Dr. Sullivan despite his lack of formal training, kept him busy treating everything from broken bones to difficult births. Abigail had taught him much of what she knew, and he'd discovered a natural talent for healing that complemented her more formal medical education. But it was the simple domestic moments that meant the most. Samuel's delighted laughter when Jace tossed him in the air, Abigail's sleepy smile in the morning light, Clara Rose's tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb. He'd built a life from love and determination, and every day felt like a gift he'd never expected to receive. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. Through the window he could see Marshal Devlin's familiar figure, along with a stranger in a territorial judge's robes. Jace's old wariness flickered briefly. Visitors in official capacity still made him nervous. But Devlin's relaxed posture suggested good news rather than trouble. "Marshal," Jace said, opening the door. "Judge, what brings you to Desert Ridge?" "Good news, I hope," Devlin replied. "This is Judge Harrison from the Territorial Court. He has some papers you might be interested in." Judge Harrison was a distinguished man with silver hair and kind eyes. He accepted Jace's invitation to sit and surveyed the comfortable home with obvious approval. "Mr. Sullivan," he began, "I have an official pardon here, signed by the territorial governor. It clears your name completely of any wrongdoing in the Morrison case and formally recognizes your role in bringing Kane Blackwood to justice." Jace's breath caught. "Blackwood's been captured?" 3 weeks ago in New Mexico territory," Devlin said with satisfaction. "Your testimony was crucial in building the case against him. He's been sentenced to hang for multiple murders." Abigail appeared in the doorway, Clara Rose in her arms and Samuel clinging to her skirts. "What's happening?" "It's over," Jace said, his voice thick with emotion. "Really over. No more looking over our shoulders. No more wondering if the past will catch up to us." Judge Harrison stood, extending the official documents. "There's more. The territorial legislature has authorized the establishment of a medical college in Phoenix. Given your reputation and the unique circumstances of your training, they've offered you a position as an instructor." Jace stared at the papers, hardly believing what he was reading. "They want me to teach medicine? Frontier medicine, specifically, how to treat gunshot wounds, handle difficult births without proper facilities, manage medical emergencies with limited resources. The kind of practical knowledge that can't be learned from textbooks." Abigail moved to stand beside her husband, reading over his shoulder. "It's a wonderful opportunity," she said quietly. "It would mean leaving Desert Ridge," Jace said, "leaving the life we've built here. Or," Judge Harrison interjected, "it would mean spending part of each year in Phoenix while maintaining your practice here. The position only requires 4 months of teaching annually. You could have both lives, the quiet family life you've built and the opportunity to train the next generation of frontier doctors." That evening, after the visitors had gone and the children were asleep, Jace and Abigail sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. The question of Phoenix hung between them, unspoken but significant. "What do you think?" Jace asked finally. "I think," Abigail said slowly, "that we've been given a gift, the chance to help other people while still maintaining our family life. Samuel and Clara Rose would benefit from spending time in a real city, and the medical college would benefit from your practical experience. And you, would you be happy dividing our time between two places?" Abigail leaned against his shoulder, her hand resting on his chest where she could feel the steady beat of his heart. "I'd be happy anywhere, as long as we're together. Besides," she smiled, "Phoenix could use a good midwife, and I've always wanted to see what a real library looks like." 3 years later, the Sullivan family was well established in their dual life. Winters in Phoenix allowed Jace to teach at the medical college, while Abigail pursued her own medical education. Summers in Desert Ridge let them maintain their frontier practice and raise their children in the small-town atmosphere they'd come to love. Samuel, now 5, was a confident, curious boy who could speak passable Spanish and ride a horse almost as well as his father. Clara Rose had grown into a precocious 3-year-old who followed her brother everywhere and showed signs of inheriting both parents' healing instincts. Their third child, baby Thomas, had arrived the previous spring with his father's dark hair and an easygoing temperament that suggested he'd inherited the best qualities of both parents. The house in Desert Ridge had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing family and Abigail's medical practice. The original adobe structure now anchored a compound that included a proper medical clinic, a stable, and living quarters that could house the orphaned children they'd begun taking in. Youngsters whose circumstances reminded them of their own desperate beginnings. On a warm summer evening, as the family gathered for dinner on their expanded porch, Jace looked around at the life they'd built and marveled at the journey that had brought them here. Samuel was helping Clara Rose with her letters, while baby Thomas slept peacefully in Abigail's arms. The desert stretched endlessly beyond their garden, vast and beautiful under a sky painted with the colors of approaching sunset. "Papa," Samuel said, looking up from his sister's lesson, "tell us the story again, about how you and baby me came to find Mama." It had become a family tradition, this telling of their origin story. Samuel never tired of hearing how his father had carried him across the desert, how they'd arrived in Desert Ridge desperate and afraid, how Abigail had saved them both with nothing but kindness and courage. "Well," Jace began, settling Clara Rose on his lap while Samuel leaned against his shoulder, "it was a hot day in summer, and your baby brother Samuel was crying something fierce." As he told the familiar tale, Abigail watched her husband's face in the fading light. The hard edges that had once marked him as a dangerous man had been worn smooth by years of love and laughter. He was still strong, still capable of defending his family if necessary, but the violence that had once defined him had been replaced by something better. The quiet strength of a man who'd learned that building was more satisfying than destroying. "And then what happened?" Clara Rose asked, even though she knew the story by heart. Then your mama opened the door, Jace continued, and she looked at us, dirty, scared, desperate, and instead of turning us away, she said the most beautiful words I'd ever heard. Come in. You're safe now. And then we became a family, Samuel added with satisfaction. Then we became a family, Jace agreed, gathering both children closer. The best family a man could ask for. Later, after the children were asleep and the desert had settled into its nighttime quiet, Jace and Abigail stood together in their garden, watching stars emerge in the clear desert sky. Thomas stirred in his mother's arms, then settled back into peaceful sleep. Any regrets? Abigail asked, echoing the question she'd posed on their wedding night. Jace considered the question seriously, as he always did. Their life wasn't perfect. No life was. There were still nights when he woke from dreams of the war, still moments when he wondered if he deserved the happiness he'd found. But these shadows were balanced by mornings filled with children's laughter, by the satisfaction of healing the sick and injured, by the daily miracle of being loved unconditionally by the woman beside him. None, he said finally, not a single one. Above them, the same stars that had witnessed their first desperate night together now blessed their contentment. The man who'd ridden into Desert Ridge as a fugitive had become a respected doctor, teacher, and father. The woman who'd lost everything had found a family worth any sacrifice. And the baby who'd nearly died in his father's arms had grown into a confident, loving boy who would carry forward the best of both his parents. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, the wild sound carrying across the desert like a blessing. The Sullivans listened to the desert song, holding each other close, knowing that whatever tomorrow might bring, they would face it together, as they had faced everything else, with love, courage, and the unshakable faith that even the most broken things could be made whole again. The story that had begun with a crying baby and a desperate man had become something beautiful, a testament to the power of love to transform lives, to the possibility of redemption even in the harshest circumstances, and to the truth that sometimes the most extraordinary families were forged not by blood, but by the daily choice to love, protect, and cherish each other no matter what storms might come. 25 years have passed since that scorching summer day when Jace Sullivan rode into Desert Ridge with a crying baby and a heart full of desperation. Today, Dr. Jace Sullivan is known throughout Arizona territory as one of the finest frontier physicians, a man whose medical skills are matched only by his compassion for those society has forgotten. The Sullivan Medical College in Phoenix, founded with the help of his wife, Dr. Abigail Sullivan, has trained over 300 doctors who carry their practical, humane approach to medicine across the American West. Their textbook, Frontier Medicine, Healing in Hard Places, has become the standard reference for physicians working in remote areas. But perhaps their greatest legacy lives in the children they've raised. Samuel Sullivan followed his father into medicine, becoming a surgeon whose gentle hands and fierce dedication to his patients echo the man who saved him in the desert. Clara Rose became a teacher who founded schools throughout the territory, while Thomas chose the law and now serves as a territorial judge known for his fairness and wisdom. The house in Desert Ridge still stands, now the center of a thriving community that bears little resemblance to the desperate outpost it once was. The Sullivan Home for Children has provided sanctuary for over 200 orphan youngsters, each one proof that family isn't created by blood alone, but by the daily choice to love without condition. Jace and Abigail, now in their 50s, still spend their summers in Desert Ridge, still welcome desperate souls who arrive at their door seeking healing. Their hair may be silver and their steps a bit slower, but their love remains as strong as ever, a beacon of hope in a world that can be harsh and unforgiving. Their story has become legend throughout the territory, told and retold around campfires and in parlors, always with the same message, that love can triumph over any circumstance, that second chances are possible for everyone, and that sometimes the most beautiful families are born from the ashes of the deepest despair. As Jace often tells the young doctors he trains, remember that every patient who comes to you is someone's child, someone's hope, someone's reason for living. Treat them with the same care you'd want for your own family, and you'll never go wrong. The crying baby who nearly died in the desert became a healer, The desperate outlaw became a pillar of his community. The grieving woman became a mother to dozens. And together they proved that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the most ordinary acts of human kindness. Have you ever experienced a moment when a stranger's kindness completely changed your life? Or witnessed someone transform from their lowest point into something beautiful? Share your stories of second chances and unexpected families in the comments below. We love hearing from viewers around the world who believe, like the Sullivans, that love really can conquer all. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more incredible stories of hope, healing, and the power of human compassion. Tomorrow we have another amazing tale that will remind you why kindness matters and family comes in all forms.